One of the first things we shot in Scanners was the scene where she's scanned by a baby. Jennifer O'Neill is in the doctor's waiting room, and sitting next to her in the waiting room is a pregnant mother, and suddenly Jennifer O'Neill's character starts getting a headache, and then she gets a nosebleed and realizes that this, not the mother, but the unborn child is scanning her from the womb. And that's how big this outbreak has become. That was, to me, the most subtle kind of thin end of the wedge that, something was beyond our control. And that's what I liked about how David conveyed this power.
He's very quiet, very calm, has a very dry sense of humor, and he's very, very open to suggestions and so on. So it's really great to work with him, because you just start with like an idea, and then you develop and you go through many stages and so on and so forth, where you finally get to know exactly what he was thinking, which direction he was going, because sometimes he doesn't quite know until he sees something.
I first met David Cronenberg on Scanners, and I flew from Los Angeles to Montreal, where the production was already in gear, and they were moving ahead quite rapidly. And it was sort of a descent into madness for me, because Scanners was a very hectic production. There was a lot of spontaneity and changes. David was having to accommodate for a lot of production pressures that were forced upon him.
And knowing the tax credit situation in Canada, the first 3 quarters of the year, all the potential investors were making money, and by October, November, and December, they would then commit to financing. So we would all be kind of lurching at the end of September. Is the money going to come through? And then, let's shoot, spend the money, go.
I was really, really sort of taken aback when I saw just how crazy the picture was going. But he wasn't just a director who could handle the pressure. He was a director who still had his vision through all this insanity, just the technical day-to-day production craziness he had to get through. He still was doing it to follow through on the vision he had, which was really cool to see.
David was pretty receptive to ideas. It wasn't a closed door situation. And as we got into the movie, I didn't care if he kept changing things. David was right about what he perceived. And he had a certain mindset about what his goals were.
He was changing things as he had to, moment by moment, and he was rewriting the script through most of the evenings at the end of production. So it was a real eye-opener for me to see somebody who was really capable and really smart at what he was doing.
David really wanted a very visceral, live quality to everything. And we were having a lot of problems trying to do certain things. And that's when I said, we're just going to really have to bring in more muscle, talent, to achieve some of these results. And I suggested Dick Smith. So they said, well, if you can encourage Dick Smith to come, and if he'll meet our budget, we would love to have him.
Dick invented his own ways to do things, and I think a much better way to do things. It was a different time, and Dick was pretty much a one-man show, and he did everything out of his basement laboratory in his house in Larchmont, and it was a little teeny basement. It was not big by any means, and it had a very low ceiling, and it was packed full of stuff.
He just pioneered so much stuff, from the sculpting part to the application and different separating a makeup in different pieces and the coloration. He was always coming up with some new stuff, and everybody just learned from him, and went on from there. That's why he's like a great inventor. He's a combination of a fantastic makeup artist and mad scientist.
You could stand right next to what he created and not see the delineation of lines. It was that fine. He really mastered this tissue paper thin skin and capturing all of the pores and the hairs, and he would literally lace hairs for hours through little thin, delicate appliances that were feather thin. And then these were bonded with different adhesives that we worked on so that everything moved in a natural way.
So we went down to visit Dick, and all this fascinating stuff that was downstairs, like Linda Blair's head from The Exorcist, and then he was suggesting doing this and that, and da-da-da-da, and a whole list of material that we had to buy while we were in New York. So that's what we did, came back to Montreal, and then they hired a third person, which was Chris Wallace from Los Angeles. He was the one who had the most experience with foam latex and, monster things and stuff. So it was great. It was kind of like a mad frat house of special effects makeup.
The way Scanners came to me was I was actually working at another shop in LA, and Dick Smith called up. I was literally shaking answering the phone because I had never spoken to Dick Smith before, and he was the god of makeup. And so he said that he was advisor on a show that was shooting in Montreal. They needed somebody there right away. Could I jump on a plane and get up there and help them out for a few weeks? The script was changing as I got there. I literally, was reading through it, and I'm going, well, what about this? And I go, no, we're not doing that. We're not shooting that. We're changing that to this. And so it was hitting the ground running for me, and fortunately, Stéphane Zupuy was there, a very, very talented makeup artist. Was not that experienced at the time, but, when you're good, and he was good.
Gary Zeller was the special effects man. And, Gary's an original. He's a chemist, so he knows all about all these different products, and the stuff that he comes up with is like really fantastic.
I'm a material scientist steeped in polymer chemistry and plastics engineering, and I excelled in creating formulations. And that was kind of what happened on Scanners, because way back in the day, most makeup artists just continued to use just basic latex rubber. But we moved into a higher order, higher caliber of sophisticated materials, silicone rubber materials. Dick Smith was pretty much the first to move into that area. And I had the contacts and the people who I could talk to get scientific information and how to do modification to these materials. So we were fortunate to create these new substances that he was very pleased with.
Gary Zeller, he's an eccentric character, very knowledgeable, and he was basically, I think he was brought on board as the pyro guy and wound up doing a large amount of other stuff on the show as well. He was very good about making you aware of what he was doing, which is what a pyro guy has to do. Pyro guys need to educate a film production crew more than anybody else doing their job, because their work is so critical and potentially dangerous. There was a scene where Gary had to blow up a gas station, I think it was, in the movie. And we were out on location. He'd done all the rigging, and there was quite a crowd watching. And the fire went up, and he had, I don't remember the number of, say, 4 major explosions to go off. And they went off 1, 2, 3, very dramatic. The crowd was thrilled. It was, 4th of July. Then they cut. And so the crews, the people watching started moving in very quickly. Wow, let's get closer to this big burning fire. I'm not sure why humans do that, but they do. And Gary was great. He knew there was one thing that had not gone off, and he had to fight to keep those people back. And he did fight, and he did keep them back. And 2 minutes later, a 50-gallon drum flies through the air from another explosion. It must have gone 60 feet in the air.
I've worked with a lot of effects guys whose predictions about how far the debris will go, how big will the fireball be, are either muted somewhat. The frame line is here and they kind of go to there. Some things are wildly off the mark. The tradition is to find out where he parked his car and stand next to that.
This is the fine art of pyrotechnics, knowing when to cut it short and not hurt people. knowing how to make intimate mixtures of chemicals, explosives. And so we were literally, I and some terrific Canadian special effects guys, we were literally making everything on the job, because sometimes Dave would say, gee, you think we could do this? And I would have to go back to the lab, so to speak, and literally compound pyrotechnical devices that I knew that I could have in close proximity to the actor without causing burns or in their hair or their clothes, and to think about take 2, 3, maybe 4.
Just sit right here, please.
The signature scene in Scanners where Louis Del Grande, his head explodes, we had a lot of trouble with that. We were trying to blow his head up, basically, and the trouble with pyrotechnics is a squib can blow something up, but it shows a spark, and if you want this kind of mental pressure, you don't want to see that there's an ignition in it. Even though there's 2 or 3 frames you could cut out, it would still work. But Dave wanted this thing, and we couldn't get it quite right.
Originally, that was not regarded as a high point item. And so, you know, the approach of, well, we'll make a head and we'll blow it with air, we'll give it a pneumatic discharge. And basically all that happened was we got this ballooning head that just looked ridiculous. And, you know, we went in circles about this.
We did a plaster head, which of course looked like a plaster head or a statue exploding. Of course, that didn't work. Then we did a wax one. Well, flesh is kind of flexible, and that looked exactly like a wax head exploding, although there was a lot of blood and gore.
We took a life cast of Louis Del Grande and we made a gelatin positive in the mold and lined that with a plaster sort of inner support skull for it. And that was then packed with various materials. Most of these were materials that were just excesses from the lab. There were some latex scraps, there's some wax, and just bits and bobs of a lot of stringy stuff that we, figured would fly through the air a little bit better.
We filled the head with literally leftover burgers and so on, because we were living on that crap. And so we just threw it in there with a bunch of like caro syrup blood and pieces of gelatin brain and so on. And then we sealed it with wax.
The hands on the table are casts of these hands. The gold ring, I think, was a last second emergency thing where we got to the set and realized he was wearing a ring. I think that was made out of mortician's wax and a gold wrapper out of Stefan's cigarette case or something like that. And we took that to the set. It was going to shoot on the original set, and then everybody realized that it might make too much of a mess. So it was shot later on, actually after I'd left the production.
We shot it initially in a Concordia University lecture room. So we took the back wall and a few side walls, put them in a warehouse down on the waterfront in Montreal. So it was basically outside. It was in a warehouse. It was freezing. And all the trucks were out there, and nobody could get this thing to explode properly. And Gary Zeller finally said, okay, here's the deal. I'm through screwing around. Everyone, roll your cameras. We had 4 cameras on it. And then get inside your trucks and close the windows.
Gary took a big shotgun and lie down behind the dummy, pointed it like right there, and then he blew the hell out of it. And that's what you see in the movie, and it worked great.
I don't know if it would actually fly in this day and age to actually shoot a shotgun on a set somewhere, but they did, and it blew up really cool.
We settled on kosher salt. That was the best material for us. Just chunky salt particles that were kind of crystalline and not too reflective, so it couldn't read too well. And then when we blasted at it with this high pressure shotgun shell filled with the kosher salt, everything just shot all over the place and it looked fabulous. If ever you want to blow up a head, I advise using kosher salt but don't do this at home.
So when we finally screened the dailies of the exploding Louis Del Grande's exploding scanner head, the producer Pierre David was enthused and appalled at the same time. He said, "It's incredible, unbelievable. We'll get an X. We have to reshoot it. We can't use this." And nonetheless, what was in the final film is that exact footage. Even though we reshot it 3 times, it was never as perfect as what was shot originally.
Where's Kim?
The next room. She'll be awake in a few hours. We don't want anyone in here with us.
This is just between you and me.
For the end sequence, the scan-off between the 2 brothers, we actually shot in one of the former pavilion, I believe it was the Italian pavilion, on the Man in His World Expo site in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. That was designed to be a summer fair, and it was. Shooting in literally the day before Christmas, lots of freezing people, lots of breath. We had to redo things. That scene was eventually reshot in the same place in June the following year.
The reshoots were pretty rough because everyone's tired and, oh, we're over budget and all that sort of stuff. And if we didn't get this in the can, and if we don't do it right, you don't have a movie.
All right. We're gonna do it the scanner way. I'm gonna suck your brain dry.
Chris Wallace was terrific. It was just wonderful to work with him and Stéphane Dupuis. And when you work long hours like these guys, with their head down in the molds and they're nodding out on the bench because they're so tired and the coffee's getting darker and darker, they did a terrific job. But they needed reinforcement because the job became almost overwhelming. That's when we brought Dick Smith in, and we had to do reshoots because those scenes were very critical, and we really had to redo a lot of stuff.
The end that you see in the movie, that was manufactured by Dick Smith. So Dick Smith took over, and that's where he invented like these Elvisite bladders and those veins popping up and all that stuff.
Dick did these really interesting effects where these veins would appear on the scanner's face when they did it the scanner's way. Those were achieved by this material that was called Elvisite. It was I believe it's some sort of vinyl. But what Dick would do would be actually make a plaster mold off of the part of the person's face. And in that mold, after it's released, paint in layers of this Elvisite, this plastic, which you paint in a layer and it would dry, and you put a little more in it, it would dry. And then he actually had pieces of rubber, thin pieces of rubber called dental dam, that he had put release agent on, and it was cut out in the shape of these veins that he wanted, and kind of put that down on the Elvisite and then paint another layer over it and another layer. And what that actually did was then create a space in these, sandwiched in between this Elvisite, which you could pump air into or pump blood into, which was what he did in the case of scanners. And it would inflate and swell up and distort and look like this vein growing on his face. And eventually it squirted out at points. And I think that actually came about. I don't think that was in the original plan. I think it was just that they were supposed to swell up. But in order to get the blood to flow through that channel in the appliance, you had to punch a little hole in the top to get the air out. So then once the blood reached that point, it would squirt out. And I guess Cronenberg, being the strange, twisted man that he is, like that.
You had arms with strange things happening. You had bladders and peculiar things all over people. He wanted, like, right in front of the camera, big open flames. He said, quote, "I want to feel the heat." And at that point, we realized that, gee, this is a little bit more than makeup and just a flame bar down below the chin,
David wasn't afraid to ask for things, because directors always want more, and Gary wasn't afraid to bring it. In fact, his contribution to the film business, the Zell gel that allows you to set people on fire and it won't soak through. You can put it on skin and it won't burn them.
Cell gel doesn't burn. It just protects you from receiving a burn. It's a shielding chemistry.
We had to now have a real actor in one position, Stephen Lack, replaced by a full-on puppeteered mannequin made up to look like him, but which would catch on fire. I believe the eyes explode. I forget all the gory details, but that was quite elaborate to light something that's made out of skin and then suddenly cut away and come back to the same person, now rubber. The rubber surface itself, it doesn't have any depth behind it. There's no blood, there's no muscle. It's just an outer layer. And quite often it'll be too smooth. And we try to talk to makeup and the AD and the director to understand that this actor should have a little oil, a little sheen on his face, and that's what we can put on the prosthetic version, the rubber version. So in this case, we lucked out, and Stephen Lack had, we were kind of prepped his facial features to match the prosthetic.
Those were really difficult scenes to do. There was a higher level of professionalism with Dick and all, and the team was all around. And that really boosted everybody's confidence. It got to a level where there was never a no. And I think that was what was exciting, to feel that the hackles on your back would go up seeing these scenes, you know? And gee, could we take it a little further, maybe?
It was just a question of like getting it right and, you know, getting it on time.
Everybody kept laughing in all the insanity on the show.
And everybody left, you know, with hugs and kisses. That's the way it should be.